Hi, Mom. Hi, everybody. Hi, Simone.
Hi. I'm not used to being in it.
That's right.
Usually here giving you the thumbs up that
I
we
know.
can hear and the image is clear.
Yep.
And I'm like behind the scenes.
I know.
This is different.
You get to be in front of the scenes. Um, for folks joining in, it is our last Slow.Look.Live session. I'm feeling very like philosophical about it. Uh, um, so it is. I'm Rachel Ropeik. I'm the learning director here at the Aspen Art Museum. I'm joined by my delightful colleague,
I'm
Simone.
Simone, Simone Krug. I'm the assistant curator at the Aspen Art Museum.
And Simone and I have been kind of like putting this program together along with Simon, our social media manager. But Simone and I have been kind of partnering on this program for most of its run. So we sort of thought it would be nice for the final session to be sort of the two of us talking about the program and reflecting on the program as a whole. And I'm like not sad about letting it go. Like it's been a wonderful program to be working on. We've been running it for 5 months. We started at the very beginning of April, and now it is the beginning of September, and it feels like the right time.
It feels like a nice moment for there to be some sort of change.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, we're not in the same place we were in April or in May,
yeah,
even in June. And it's almost like, sunsetting this incredible program feels like we're looking forward, for
yeah,
lack of a better way of putting
yeah.
it.
It does. It's sort of like making room for what comes next.
Fast look live, perhaps.
Maybe medium speed look live. But we sort of thought maybe we can kind of start out by like talking about sort of the like how the program came to be and like how we figured out what it was going to look like, um, and then kind of get philosophical. And anybody who is watching, I know some people who are watching have watched previous ones, or this may be your first one, but feel free to chime in with comments or questions at the bottom, and we'll bring those into our conversation too. It feels like
So,
another world when this program began.
so let's see, mid-March, we shut down like every other institution and workplace and school. And we were all kind of sitting at home wondering what was next. And I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, well, it's funny because we had started thinking about doing something like this online. Um, but basically, the first idea, hi Vanessa, basically, the first idea when we first shut down was what if we could do kind of a slow look at an artwork where like I could go into the museum by myself while the museum was closed, and that it could maybe be a way of sharing artwork with people while they couldn't physically come to the museum. And then, of course, like when lockdown and quarantine and stay at home orders came in, like I wasn't going to come into the museum either. I was also staying at home. But one thing, so I've done a lot of like slow looking programs in the past. And one thing that I love about it is that the conversations that you start to have, like, for example, if you spend a whole hour with a single work of art, the conversation gets really rich. Um, and I'm going to come back to your question, Mom, in 1 second.
Lots to say about that question.
Lots to
Stay
say.
tuned.
Um, um, So the conversation gets really rich, and you notice things and you share things with people over the course of a longer focused discussion than you necessarily would if you were doing like a quick walk through the galleries, looking at lots of art and then moving right on. So we sort of, when we couldn't make these conversations focus about art because we were all at home, it was sort of like we shifted a little bit to think about like, how could we have conversations that are still picking up on some of those other benefits of slowing down and focusing and coming together. And so many people, myself included, I don't know if you felt this way, Simone, but I feel like at the beginning of lockdown, it was like, what am I doing? Like, how do I separate work time from out of work time? I'm all in the same place. How do I exercise? Like, everything was such a uncertain question mark.
Yeah. Do you remember the first couple of days? Like the first couple of days I was super confused, and I think like by week 2 it was like, okay, I need to like make myself an office area, and I need to like, you know, put on shoes.
Yeah.
I know it's sort of a silly thing to say,
Yeah.
but yeah.
No, I think
I'm sure our viewers feel the same about what, you know, their day-to-day activity and that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I felt the same way. It was sort of like, here's the part of my apartment that is going to be work corner. And I think that was kind of in thinking about how this program would go, because the first one of these was the first week of April.
Mm-hmm.
And it was still very snowy in Aspen. I'm here on the roof of the museum, the top level. We've got some sculpture in the background. We've got mountains in the background here. You can see the blue sky a little bit over there. We've got our Shigeru Ban architecture, none of which was available to us at the beginning of April. And it was a little bit of like, let's have this kind of weekly ritual toward the end of the day on Friday to help mark time passing, transition into the weekend with some kind of like thoughtful, focused conversations with interesting, creative people.
Yeah. I think, you know, when I first heard about the concept for this program and the idea of coming in to look at works in a slow and thoughtful way, I was particularly excited about it because we had half of a Rose Wiley exhibition installed.
Yeah.
So some of our staff had a chance to walk in and see the works that had been installed, but, you know, our public hadn't, you know, we hadn't opened yet. And so it was like, oh, you know, we have this work hanging and nobody is looking at it.
Yeah.
Like our security team, you know, who are maybe making their rounds through the museum, but there was something kind of exciting at the beginning, at least, with that idea, with like kind of being able to show, even if it's just, you know, through your phone or through your iPad, to show some of the works that we had on view that no one was really seeing.
Yeah, I know. And it's like part of me is sad that we didn't get to do that. And we're still, I mean, you know, no spoilers, but we're still thinking about how we can bring some of the actual work in the galleries into digital platforms to share with people who aren't physically able to get here. But I also feel like one thing that came out of what this program developed into was that it became a much more...
I'm plugging my phone in, sorry. Yeah.
It became a much more like wide-ranging, interesting series of conversations and topics than I think it ever could have if it was staying focused on our work. Oh, hi, Teresa.
Well, we had no parameters.
Yeah.
I mean, creative people. Like,
yes.
Which is a huge, huge umbrella. It was like, well, this isn't just going to be artists. This isn't just going to be museum professionals. This is sort of going to have this super wide range, this big, we cast the net very wide, I think.
Yeah. And I think there was something really nice about that too. And to go back to the question earlier about the pluses and minuses of doing this on Instagram, I think one of the things that was nice about Instagram was that it feels conversational. Ooh. It feels conversational and it feels casual. Like it kind of lends itself to that like wide net. These experiences don't have to be the same thing every time. They can change based on who we're talking to and what they're thinking about. And I feel like Instagram as a platform was a really nice fit for that. It was like, I think when people are watching things on Instagram, at least I'll speak for myself, like I'm not expecting something to be like edited and produced and, you know, kind of perfectly lit and slick. It feels a little bit more immediate.
Yeah, yeah. And there were definitely moments where we had hiccups, at least at the very beginning, and there were a
Yeah.
lot of laughs on our end. But well, I think it must have been maybe our second or our third session with Sarah
Yeah.
Motalahi, who's in Marfa, and we did a tech check beforehand to make sure we had a strong internet connection, and then during the session, it was like glitch art. Um, and I think I was texting you like behind the scenes to say like, hey, maybe we need to restart. You had good reception. Sarah didn't. I think she tried to take us outside to show us some nature, which was incredible. But in the end, you kind of you try it out and you learn. And so we ended up filming a second session for that one, and it was a good experience to have at the beginning. Unfortunately, we were all kind of laughing about it. That's the kind of thing that that wouldn't happen if we were doing a talk in person on the roof deck at the museum.
Right.
But the fact that it was on Instagram kind of made it casual and sort of easy. Right?
Yeah, and it was sort of like, I think that was also a really good learning moment to have early on, because it kind of reminded us that they could look different. Like it made sense to re-record that one because Sarah had really interesting things to say and the conversation went in some interesting places. And if people weren't able to hear that, like we wanted to make sure to share the conversation, and that was more important than that it needed to be at that time or in that exact format. Like we re-recorded the conversation, we were able to share it. It's on our IGTV page now. And I
What
think it was like a good reminder of kind of like loosening the format to respond to what came up.
so when we had planning meetings with most of the people, we kind of how did we start? We would say something like, okay, what are you up to right now, or what are you working on? And it was this experience where for the first time I think like a lot of people were like, you know what, I'm actually working on nothing right now, or like I'm taking a moment to like, very cliche, but like bake bread or garden or what have
Yeah.
you. And that was one of the really exciting things. It was just this moment to not be productive.
Yeah.
Just like I remember that actually from Oscar Murillo, who's like incredibly prolific, always making work, to the point that like he has works in the show that's up at the Aspen Art Museum until September 27th, called Flight Series, his flight drawings. He's literally drawing with a pen and pencil while he's on the airplane. And here's this moment where Oscar was like, yeah, I'm not really doing a lot right now. And it was really kind of exciting, this like move against capitalist production, perhaps.
Yeah. And I would say that is probably the productivity theme was maybe the thing that came up in the most varied ways. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like at different moments, we were talking to different people and they were feeling different ways about it. But people kind of asking themselves that question about what does it mean to be productive right now? Maybe that's not making work or doing things in a museum, but maybe productivity looks like, like I'm thinking about when we talked with Andros Zins Brown
That was, yeah,
about,
exactly.
and he was like,
Choreographer.
yeah, he's a choreographer and was thinking a lot about cycles of life and death. And he was gardening a lot and had a compost pile and was thinking about worms. And, that maybe there was sort of a parallel there around like cycles of creative output also having to, like, needing a fallow time, right? And that maybe this was a time to not be producing as much, but to be reflecting more.
But also, dance and choreography is so very much about like human contact and being in spaces with other people. And I think that posed this big challenge. It was like, well, I can't really be in New York City. Like, I've moved from New York City for a while, And I'm not really in the same sort of community in this moment, and I can't really like engage people in the same sort of way.
Mm.
Yeah.
It was interesting, I would say, also when we had people who wanted to show images. That was one thing that was maybe a bit of a challenge on Instagram, um, just because in order to show images, there was no really great way to kind of get a full screen of that. I actually would say one of the ones that felt successful was when Teresa Booth Brown joined us, who is an artist who also works here at the Aspen Art Museum, and she was sharing some of her art. And the way that I did it was actually, here's behind the scenes of Slow.Look.Live, was that I think in that case, I think I like held up my own computer screen with her work on it rather than trying to put it up through Instagram, just so that there could be a more undisturbed looking experience at that artwork. That was an interesting one to figure out, kind of how do we show visual art
Yeah,
images in this way.
we it, Instagram, if you're taking notes, and or if you're watching, it would be so great to be able to sort of watch or be a part of this in a different way, like on a computer, on a bigger screen. There were definitely participants who were like, great, so I'm going to sit at my desktop, and, you know, at my desk, and we had to sort of, I guess, break the news, like, actually there are these, like, technical, I'm forgetting the word for this, hoops we have to jump through, or
Yeah.
not really, yeah.
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 I mean, overall, I still sort of feel like, you know, I think it was nice. Like we did a few sessions where um, they weren't just conversation. Like I think the majority of these kind of took a conversational format. But I think that was also really nice that when we had these planning calls with folks, we kind of let their interests determine. You know, I'm thinking about like, so the session that we ended up doing with Andros, the choreographer who we were just talking about, he actually, we let him kind of take over the museum's account. So it wasn't like two faces like this. And he took us on a video tour of his compost heap. And he was reading out all of these like very poetic and philosophical texts about cycles of life and death. And it was also right around the kind of like first weeks of the Black Lives Matter uprisings in the US, and he was thinking a lot about that. And so some of the readings also touched on, you know, racism in the States. Like it was very kind of performative. It felt like a performance session. Or I'm trying to think what else it was like when we talked to Abraham Cruz Viegas, and he was in this like beautiful town in France, and we had a conversation, but he was walking around in this beautiful nature. Like I think that idea of like where people were was also a really nice thing to highlight. I mean, when Sarah was in Marfa, you know, it was like
we were all stuck at home, and so it was incredibly exciting to see, you know, a foreign country and to see someone walking in a landscape that looked different than the one that we, you know, had gotten really used to. I got to know the surrounding, you know, neighborhood around my apartment. Like I can tell you what every house looks like because I walked around my block so many times. And so it did kind of feel, at least at the beginning in April and May, very much like an escape.
Yeah. And I feel like that was also one thing that shifted, was like in that period, I think we were also really trying intentionally to talk to people about where they found themselves in that phase. You know, it was like when we talked to Oscar and he was in the mountains in Colombia, or we talked to Abraham, he was in the, you know, this little town in rural France. You know, like I think that was a moment of quarantine where we were really itching for that view into somewhere else.
But then that shifted.
Yeah.
That shifted. I think, you know, I think there was this moment, you know, maybe the end of May, beginning of June, of deeper reflection with these uprisings going on all over the country, all over the world. And I think we kind of realized, like, okay, maybe let's shift gears or shift focus and sort of
Yeah.
listen to what people want to talk about in a different kind of a way, and let them sort of dictate how the session unfolds in a yeah.
Yeah, I also that's one of my favorite things about this program that I will like looking back on it is how it kind of became a diary of this 5 month period. And
Well,
that
yeah.
so much changed in that. Like I think about so Damian Davis, who was I think our first guest that we had on. We took a week off to pause to sort of let
Yeah.
other voices take precedence when the Black Lives Matter uprisings were kind of first beginning at the beginning of June. And Damien was our first conversation back after that. And we had started talking to him and planning before.
We had a second planning session with
Yeah.
Damien.
And it really, like, some of it changed and some of it didn't, right? Like, we didn't completely change our conversation. But even just in sort of like those planning conversations and thinking about how it really felt important to respond to what was going on in people's lives, not just kind of like, where are you at with your creative process? That was still part of it, obviously, but I do feel like that was that shift where it felt like, okay, this is also kind of a reflection on um, how people are getting through these times with all of these multi-layered challenges facing everybody in different ways.
Yeah.
And then I think there was also, I think we were trying to balance out. It was like, who are we talking to? Like, okay, like you said before, it wasn't just going to be like always artists or always museum professionals, but we would kind of look at like, okay, we've had a run of a lot of artists in a row. Why don't we try and talk to somebody who doesn't identify as an artist? Or we've had a run of museum educators in a row. Let's talk to somebody who doesn't identify as a museum educator.
Yeah.
And that the flexibility to do that, I think, was also really nice.
In a sense, I view this program as like a microphone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, just like a platform for people to come on and maybe talk about what they're thinking about or what they're interested in. And for that reason, we did want this multiplicity of voices, of creative voices.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And
Yeah.
it was amazing. Like, we had such a range of people from like very well established, well known artists with multiple museum shows to their name over long careers. And then, like, I also remember at the very beginning, we talked to some of the young curators who were teens that worked on a program with the Aspen Art Museum and had really like spent a whole year honing their kind of looking skills. And, you know, we had Lily and Logan join us from that program. Like, it was to me, that felt really satisfying. Like, it was kind of breaking down some of the hierarchies that you might normally expect to find in art museums, which I'm always excited about.
I feel like we pivoted so much of our programming into this platform. So it sort of encompassed, the kinds of conversations we're having with like local artists or with students who we're doing programming with, or people who, on a normal basis might actually come out and do like a keynote lecture and that sort of thing. And they all kind of fell into place in this really lovely way in the context of this program.
Yeah.
That really worked, I think.
It was nice. Also, I should remind anybody who's watching, if you have comments or questions, feel free to type them into the chat. Whether you have watched many programs in this series or whether this is your first one. Comments and questions welcome.
I have a question for you.
Oh, okay.
What do you think you've learned? What are your big takeaways?
What have I learned? I guess I would say it has been a really valuable experience for me in practicing some of that, like letting go of control. Like the idea of having all of these sessions that are kind of like, where are you at? What are you thinking about? How do you want to frame this? And really trying to keep that net open. I think there's a part of me that that has that as the natural urge, but there is a arguably larger part of me that kind of wants to know all the details and have everything very well planned. And I feel like I've actually really gained a lot of comfort from having this ongoing weekly practice of having something that feels a little bit more relaxed and a little bit unknown and a little bit different. Hi, Brooke. And that has been, I think, really valuable for me. Like, I feel like every week we finish this conversation and it's like, no matter what has gone on in the rest of the week or the rest of the day, it feels like I walk away from these conversations feeling kind of like new ideas have been sparked, or like interesting, thoughtful content was there, which I don't think would happen if I had tried to like exert more control over the format or the conversations or setting things up in a certain way.
It's been this opportunity to kind of facilitate on so many different levels and with so many different kinds of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Huh. And that, like, to me, that's part of what I love about museum education, is that it's not, to my mind, it's not about me teaching people about art as the dominant mode or the primary goal. It's about facilitating. Mm-hmm. And whether that is facilitating a group conversation in the galleries, or in this case, it was kind of like a one-on-one conversation where I got to sort of like sit there and listen to what interesting people had to say and ask them questions and have these conversations. That was really, I think it made me feel like that like museum educator self was soothed or satisfied.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, can I turn that same question around to you, Simone? What do you feel like you've learned working on it?
How to listen. Not to say that I didn't know that before. But I think, yeah, I don't know. I think perhaps there are times when I think a conversation is going to go in one way, or I think I want someone to speak about something specific, and that's not quite the direction that they want to take it. And that's kind of been a takeaway that I've had just in some of these planning conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's been nice to focus on kind of like the listening and the facilitation as being the role that I was trying to play in these conversations. That, like, even if it was conversational, it was like I mostly wanted to give the guests airtime,
Yeah.
you know, like sharing the
Yeah,
mic.
you did. Yeah.
But yeah, like that listening was kind of a nice takeaway. I mean, can I also ask anybody who is watching, who has watched any of these other sessions, are there any things that you are taking away or that you found memorable? Feel free to type them in the comments. Not to put you all viewers on the spot, but I've seen a couple of names joining in here that I know have watched several sessions in the past. So please do feel free to share your own observations.
One of the curious things, actually, was, you know, there were definitely a few people who we asked to participate in this. You know, I don't think this is the right format for me. And also, like, kind of completely understanding that, too.
Yeah.
You know, not everybody's comfortable in this kind of setting.
Yeah.
And that was interesting also, I think.
Yeah.
Like, actually, this isn't a time that I necessarily want a platform.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't really think I can necessarily add to the conversation because I'm going through a lot, because we're all going through a lot, especially at the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, so one observation about, how interesting it was to listen to descriptions of artwork for the visually impaired. So yeah, that was one of our first sessions, was with Maya Jeffries, who's an artist and museum professional who does a lot of work with video art and also works on programming for people with disabilities, including people who are visually impaired. or have low vision. And she did this kind of verbal description exercise. So that was one of the programs that wasn't just a conversation, because Maya and I know each other and we have worked together before, but we kind of did an exercise where she described an image and I tried to draw it from her description and then kind of looked at the image after the fact. So that was, yeah, I agree. I think like verbal description of images is always a really interesting kind of creative way of approaching art, no matter how much sight you do or do not have. I feel like I also, I guess one other thing that I really loved was sort of when the formats changed, when it wasn't always conversational. I mean, the conversations were amazing, but when they weren't always conversational, it was also kind of like the one with Lauren King from New York City Ballet, where it was like dancing about the sculpture that is behind me and responding to prompts. Like, I think that was also, to me, really kind of surprising every time and satisfying to process artwork in other modes. And then Bernie is asking a question, what's next? Beyond Slow.Look.Live, where are the young people? Not at the museum right now, although we are open again, but it's, summertime, and then they're back in school figuring out how to do hybrid school. And bringing young people back into the museum. And I think that's definitely on our suite of education plans. It's coming. I think that was also something that kind of made it feel like this was a natural stopping point, is like you said earlier, Simone, it's like the changing of the mood and the changing of the seasons. It's kind of like, what do we want to do next? Like having some time and space. Oh, and Teresa is adding in, I really appreciated time and space for conversation. Simple idea, but so important. I think that was a big part of what I found so satisfying every week, was just like having these great conversations, being able to share them with people.
And then someone asked, did you build an audience over the life of the program, or is it more of an up and down based on topic? We did. I mean, when someone from a different account logs in to be in conversation, the institution, I think we got a bunch more followers from each session, right?
Yeah.
And a lot more interest from different people all over the place, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. And it was also really interesting to see, like, for example, I recognize some of the usernames of people who log in, but not all of them, right? So it was really interesting to see some of these names that I know are connected to people that I know in life, but also some people who are seeing this, joining in because the Aspen Art Museum is going live, but then I'm also like recognizing some names, and I say hello to all of you who are out there watching, whose names I have seen pop up in multiple programs, and I don't necessarily know who you all are. So hi.
And those are the people who, when we have programs in the space, like pre-COVID, those are the people we always say hello to, because they're kind of part of our core audience. Of course. They're the faces that we recognize that are already kind of a part of our community. And so everybody who's joined for all of these sessions, please know you're always welcome to our in-person events when those start up again.
And
whenever that is.
Yeah, and it's like, in some ways, I found a sense of appreciation of seeing some usernames, even if they weren't all people that I connected with in real life. Well, this is real life too, but like in physical space or pre-COVID life. But it felt like there was this sense of community of like, oh, there's so-and-so logging in again, or like, oh, they weren't here last week, but here they are again. And that was really nice to feel like there was a sense of digital community, even if we were not all seeing each other's faces in physical space. I also, and Hags is chiming in, enjoyed the intimate check-ins with creatives around the world. I'm glad to hear
I
that
did
because
too.
I feel like that was one thing that we were
Thanks,
really
X.
hoping for. Well, that it was, when we kind of discovered very quickly from the get-go that we were not going to be able to come into the museum and look at art together,
Uh-huh.
albeit digitally, that sort of felt um, like an equally valuable thing. It was like, here's just these perspectives from creative thinkers all over the place.
You know, to that end, actually, I feel like we'd have a conversation with one person one week and they would be in a certain mental space. And then we'd have a conversation with the next participant for the next week and they would be completely different, you
Yeah.
know? And so,
Yeah.
like, the question about, like, what the big takeaway was very much listening to that end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was also really interesting, I think, to hear from people who didn't necessarily, like different guests who didn't necessarily know each other, but to hear some of the same things, like about
The through
questioning
lines.
productivity and, like all of this stuff coming up for so many different people in different places.
On a really personal level, it made me feel better about all of the, things I thought I was the only person going through.
Same.
And, like talking to friends about this, off Zoom or off camera, it was like, yeah, I have these conversations with creative people every week, and this person who's normally incredibly prolific said this about what they were doing, and it's like, oh, there's a sense of community and a sense of camaraderie.
It was very validating in that way. Like we're all kind of separated and locked down in these different places, but we're experiencing some of the same things.
Yeah.
And this is my mom's comment. Hi, Mom. That a program like this would likely never have occurred without the pandemic, right? That it provided this kind of freedom to experiment where the stakes were low. Like we were starting up this new digital thread of programming, right? And we didn't necessarily know in advance how it was going to work or who was going to tune in or whether it would kind of have a following. But it did let us try it out. And it was a way of staying in touch with our community in the platform that was available to us when we couldn't be seeing each other physically.
It let us just program quickly and program in a way that, we can't do with like an exhibition, which we plan, a year or more out.
Yeah.
But this opportunity. Oh, here's an artist we want to have, start a dialogue with. And it really was low stakes. It was like, okay, here's this platform and this opportunity to have a conversation for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, because you're definitely someone we, admire and want to be in dialogue with. But, we might reach out to them a couple of weeks before,
Yeah.
which is definitely not the way we had been programming anything ever
Yeah.
before that.
Well, and I think also part of what made that work was that so many people had more flexibility to their time than they normally would, where, we would say like, well, we're looking at, these coming dates in the next, 4 weeks. And people would say, I could do any of them.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, oh, I feel better about the fact that that person who I assume is so busy normally, who's just kind of home, like we all are right now, kind of like working from their couch, doing school from their, living room, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And I feel like that was one thing that felt really satisfying about the slow looking, like to kind of bring it back to the initial inspiration for the program. It's like the benefits and being able to focus on some of the benefits of this sort of forced slowdown in some ways. Not that everything has slowed down. And of course, that's come with a lot of problems and challenges. And it's a global pandemic and economic crises. And, I'm not making light of any of that or dismissing it. But I think that was one thing that felt really satisfying, was like being able to hold on to that connection of the benefit of slowing down and focusing on where we are and just like talking about where people are at.
Yeah. it really was that. It was really a check-in. Like, it's a moment for reflection.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Where are you at? You know,
Yeah.
that's kind of how those planning conversations started.
Yeah. And I do really like, and for anybody who is watching, we don't have all of them up on IGTV because that was a change that Instagram made to their own live program. I mean, Instagram
As it
made some,
exploded.
yeah, as everyone started going live through the pandemic, they made some changes. But we do have quite a lot of the sessions that we did on our IGTV, the Aspen Art Museum account, IGTV tab. So if you do want to listen back to any of them, I think that's a really nice kind of document of this period of time to continue to be able to share with people if they're interested.
It's funny. I remember when we first started to upload them, just making sure that we kept the dates on them.
Yeah.
Really, that first one, I
Yeah.
wanted it to be known that happened in April.
Yeah.
Because it felt maybe by May when we were thinking of how best to upload it, it just felt like a different moment. It felt like
did.
a document already.
Yeah.
So odd. Yeah.
So maybe we should wrap up there.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for not just this session, but for all of them, or most of them. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, well, and thank you, Simone. I feel like I really appreciated kind of the way we talked through ideas about these and had these planning conversations and like found ways of working between education and curatorial as this program developed. And that was really nice. We got to work together in a really nice way that I appreciated.
Yeah. Well, I hope all of our viewers have a great weekend.
Yeah. And thank you all if you joined us just today or if you watched a bunch of them. Thank you for joining us on this program journey. And we look forward to seeing what comes next. All right.
Bye. Signing off.
Adios. Slow.Look.Live.